Jury duty, the only place where you'll see 12 law-abiding citizens look enviously at confessed felons because they get to leave early. Nobody likes jury duty. You're basically deciding whether or not someone should lose their freedom and be locked away from society, which, ironically, is what is happening to you as you serve on the jury. You have to admire the creativity of the American people. We've tried literally everything to get out of jury duty.
Excuse me, Imperial Guard. How long do these arson trials typically last?
A couple weeks, probably. You can drop the voice.
This used to get me out of jury duty in Chicago all the time.
My personal favorite, preface each of your statements with, according to the prophecy. But in all seriousness, ensuring that the jury in any given trial is as fair and objective as possible is a really important task. Before any citizen has the lucky opportunity to sit in on a trial, both the defense and the prosecution interview the potential pool of jurors in a process called voir dire. Now, if either lawyer believes there is information that suggests a juror is prejudiced about the case, he or she can ask the judge to dismiss that juror for cause. For example, a juror can be dismissed for cause if he or she is a close relative of one of the parties or one of the lawyers, or if he or she works for a company that is part of the lawsuit. Each lawyer may request the dismissal of an unlimited number of jurors for cause. Each request will be considered by the judge and may or may not be allowed. A dismissal for cause looks a little something like this. Alright, so we're trying the case of Mr. Potato, who is being charged for the senseless slaughter of thousands of Irish people. Now, when it comes to selecting the jury, along comes Mr. Yam, who seems like a good juror, but there's one issue. See, I know Mr. Yam's secret. I know that he is in fact a distant cousin of Mr. Potato, and for that fact, he cannot be on the jury. In addition to challenges for cause, each lawyer has a specific number of peremptory challenges. These challenges permit a lawyer to excuse a potential juror without stating a cause. In effect, they allow a lawyer to dismiss a juror because of a belief that the juror will not serve the best interest of the client. A peremptory challenge looks something like this.
In the arms of the angel.
Peremptory challenges are limited to a certain number determined by the kind of lawsuit being tried. The only limitation is that these peremptory challenges can't be motivated by race or sex after the Batson v. Kentucky case deemed it a violation of the 14th Amendment. Unfortunately, this didn't stop attorneys. Take, for example, Foster v. Chapman, in which Timothy Tyrone Foster, an 18-year-old black man, was charged with the murdering of an elderly white woman. At the trial, the prosecution used peremptory strikes against all 4 of the black jurors. Now take a look at this jury questionnaire, in which the prosecution circled the juror's race, black, and labeled each prospective African American juror as B number 1, B number 2, and B number 3. B1, B2, these undoubtedly stand for Black 1 and Black 2, considering the similarities between these jurors. That is, unless the prosecutors were referring to B1 and B2, the names of the bananas in pajamas. I hereby call the bananas in pajamas to the stand. Batson v. Kentucky tried to prevent this by creating a standard, which stated that if the opposing counsel pointed out a potentially discriminatory trend in the peremptory strikes, the attorneys initiating the strikes had to prove to the judge that the jurors at hand must be removed for legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons. The following reenactment is based on a true story. Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Persky, I'd like to know your reasons for striking jurors 22 and 24.
Sure. I struck juror number 22 because of his long hair. He had this long, curly hair. He had the longest hair of anybody on the jury by far. And he appeared to not be a good juror for that fact. The fact that he had this long hair, is hanging down shoulder length, curly, unkempt hair. Also, he had this mustache and goatee type beard. Juror number 24 also had a mustache and goatee type beard. These were the only 2 people on the panel with facial hair, and I just didn't like the way they looked, okay? I didn't like the way they looked. With the hair, it was cut, both of them. And the mustaches and the beards look suspicious to me too. This is completely ridiculous, especially considering that he basically just described Ned Stark. Then again, he may be onto something with this whole suspicious facial hair thing. I mean, how do you explain these guys? Attorneys have basically figured out how to be racist without sounding racist, jury edition. But believe it or not, how-to guides like this actually exist. In fact, in 1986, Philadelphia prosecutor Jack McMahon created a training video which taught attorneys that young, black, female jurors and other blacks who are, quote, real educated, pose problems for the prosecution, as do older black women who may sympathize with black male defendants out of, quote, maternal instinct. Black men, particularly older black men, are described as less problematic.
Here is to get a competent, fair, and impartial jury. Well, that's ridiculous. You're there to win. And in order to win, and the defense is there to win too, and the only way you're going to do your best is to get jurors that are as unfair and more likely to convict than anybody else in that room. Let's face it again. There's the blacks from the low-income areas are less likely to convict. And as a result, you don't want those people on your jury. And it may appear as if you're being racist or whatnot, but again, you're just being realistic. You're just trying to win the case. You don't want smart people, because smart people will analyze the hell out of your case. They have a higher standard. They hold you up to a higher standard. They hold the courts up to a higher standard because they're intelligent people. They take those words reasonable doubt, and they actually try to think about them.
In 1995, a workshop was held by North Carolina district attorneys, and it distributed this paper. And a similar list, distributed in 2004 to Texas prosecutors, included justifications like, quote, agreed with O.J. Simpson verdict, and watched gospel TV programs. If prosecutors want to get this specific, they might as well add, I don't know, still likes Nickelback, or prefers Biggie over Tupac, or is Canadian. They'll never see the defendants guilty. The difficulty in these loopholes is not just that it's something that jurors can be trained in, but also that it is simple and transparent enough that even our list, in all of its sarcasm, could probably work. However, attorneys don't always have to discriminate to end up with a jury devoid of minorities. A number of urban realities already do so. Minorities who are overrepresented in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods with high crime rates are much more likely to be crime victims or have relatives or friends who have been. This is already a reason they can be struck down. The lawyers fear that such jurors will be biased against defendants. Crime victims are disproportionately minorities. Minorities are also disproportionately poor, and the poor are less likely to report for jury duty. For one thing, frequent movers do not have a fixed address for jury notices to be sent to. Also, minimum wage earners cannot even give up daily earnings or risk their jobs, and jury stipends, which are just $15 in California, are simply not high enough to justify an entire day. This is basically the state of California letting you know that to them, your time is worth just $15. $15! That's like the equivalent of some shitty knockoff Ray-Bans, you know, the kind you buy of some sweaty guy at a swap meet. That's how much you're worth. There are ways we can mend this system. In Illinois, a Fair Jury Act required courts to assemble juries that were representative of the demographic of the county. As the bill's preamble states, the barring of these minorities from the jury deprives the courts of, quote, diverse perspectives, and thereby impairs the capacity of the courts to ascertain the truth. And between 1998 and 2000, both New York and Texas's El Paso County raised the jury stipend to $40. That's still not a lot, but at least you can now buy 2 bottles of vodka to disguise as water to get you through the trial. According to the American Bar Association's American Jury Project, the number of people showing up for jury duty in El Paso has doubled since the pay hike, and the proportion of minorities reporting has risen significantly. The issue with the Batson precedent is that, though it was in good intentions, it fails in practice. The decision decreed that before a trial court can find a Batson violation, it must determine that an attorney has 1. Exercised a racially motivated peremptory challenge, and 2. Lied to the court in an effort to justify the strike. The judge is expected to find all of this simply through the attorney's demeanor. It's basically trying to call a bluff in a high-stakes poker game, except the stakes are much higher than the life savings of a gambling addict going through his midlife crisis. What is left by Batson is only the unapologetically bigoted or painfully unimaginative, a rare breed in figures of power with exception to the current GOP primaries. Everyone else, like the prosecutors for Timothy Tyrone Foster, casually slips by. In fact, recent court cases like Perquette versus Elam in 1995 didn't strengthen Foster, but did the exact opposite, holding that judges can accept even a, quote, silly or superstitious reason as long as it doesn't explicitly invoke race. When the 1986 McMahon training video was released to the public, a man named Robert Cook, who was convicted by McMahon a decade before, filed for a petition of relief. During his trial, McMahon had used 14 of his 19 peremptory challenges to strike black potential jurors from Cook's jury. The resulting jury put him on death row. 30 years later, Timothy Tyrone Foster's death penalty decision also hangs in the air, a sobering reminder that what's forgotten in between the lines of race and justice is often a person's life. But even with our corrupt jury selection system in place, some people still like jury duty. In most cases, they are the poor souls who believe they're supporting a truly democratic system, one put in place in order to make America great again.
The frenzy moved to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where the presidential candidate showed up for jury duty after waiting around like all of the other prospective jurors, at times seen dozing off. Trump ultimately dismissed, which means he will not be called back for jury duty for 6 years. But I'm telling you, Dana, outside that courthouse, it was as if Elvis showed up.
He's just
there's
like
really
us.
something there.
He's just like us.
I
served jury duty last year. That's good to see.
Such professional people. We had a great time. The potential jurors were wonderful.
You know, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.